Anyway, here sitting on her desk is a little nameplate. He puts on the nameplate, Missy Ronnie. Well, so I thought to myself, this is a strange coincidence. And I think many of you are familiar with the fact that I was a mathematics minor in the university. And so immediately, just instinctively, my mind said, well, that's about 1 chance in 2 billion. That's pretty good. You know, because there are plenty Iranis in the Parsi community, but there aren't that many in Air India. I knew that immediately. So immediately, I had a surge of hope. I just had a feeling this is being looked after in some fashion. And I really began to hope. So I sat down and she said, what can I do for you? And I said, I have a very serious problem. One of my closest friends in my life has just died unexpectedly, and I've got to get to India. And she said, well, but do you have a visa? And I said, no, I'm afraid I don't. And I said, do you know of any special procedures that Air India has in circumstances of this sort? Well, she said, yes, I know of something. We rarely use it, but in the case of a human compassion emergency, we can send a telex to the port captain of Santa Cruz Airport in Bombay, and he has the authority to take upon himself the responsibility of granting emergency humanitarian entry. I said, well, that's exactly what we must try. And said, do you think that I would qualify for that? She said, I think that we could word a telex in a fashion which would appeal to him. And she said, by the way, where is it that you want to go in India? And I said, well, actually, to Pune. But if I can get to Bombay, then one way or another I'll get through all right. He said, oh, Pune, that's interesting. That's where I was born and was reared. And I said, well, you know, and it's also interesting that my friend's family name was the same as yours, Irani. I said, oh, Irani, maybe I knew the family. And I said, well, probably not, because although his family name was Irani, very early in his life he was given a sort of a nickname. You know, I had to say something. I don't know whether Baba approves of calling Mayor Baba a nickname. It was the first handle that came to my mind, and I used it, so there we are. So I said his nickname was Mayor Baba. Mayor Baba? But he was my uncle's schoolmate, and they're close friends all of their life. Oh, we must do something about this. I mean, she was right there. Imagine, Miss Irani's uncle was Baba's old schoolmate. So I thought, oh boy, yeah, this is really getting thick on me. We're pulling a few things here. So, what do we do? She said, well, would you do this? Would you write out roughly the general circumstances in your language, your words, and then I will modify it into Air India language. We'll get it off. She said, no, it's a little bit after 10 o'clock. The plane leaves for New Delhi, and she said, then it continues on to Bombay and terminates there. And she said it leaves at 3 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10:30, take about 2 hours at the very best. I won't be here, but my substitute will be here. I'll give you his name. At 12:30, you call here, and maybe by a miracle, we'll have a reply back from the captain of the airport. She said, at that point, if it's favorable, you just have to pack your bags, go out to the airport, buy your ticket, and get on the plane. So I said, yeah, sounds wonderful. I wrote it out. She gave me the name of the individual who was going to be her substitute. I get in a taxi. I go home. I said, to hell with this business of sitting around here. I packed my bag. I went out to the airport. Another taxi, can you imagine? I was spending a filthy amount of money, but at any rate, there we are. So I had my bag, and I went out to Air India, and I asked for a ticket on the day's flight. They were a little bit chary about that, and I said, well, the authorization's coming through, don't worry about that, I'll have the necessary fees and everything shortly. So they're always anxious to sell a ticket, so they sold me a ticket, and I bought a separate ticket from Bombay up to Pune, just in case. After all, if you're going to be greedy, why you ask for everything, don't you? So I bought them all right there on the spot. I found out there was plenty of space on the flight, so they had no worries about the fact I was a little irregular at that point. So 12:25, I get this done. Go over to the telephone, plug in the money, ask for this particular individual, identify myself. He said, I'm sorry, Mr. Stevens, but we do not have any reply back. I said, what do you suggest? He said, well, try again in 30 minutes, and let's hope. Let's just hope. So I went over and tried to read the Herald Tribune, a few things like that, not getting anywhere with any of it. And at 1 o'clock, plugged the money in. I called up the duty officer again at Air India, identified myself again. They said, we had just had the okay. Can't imagine. Isn't that incredible? But suddenly, when I heard that, I just felt the immediate, total presence and love and care of Bobby himself. I mean, after all, his amusing way of identifying Miss Irani and this ancient connection, it was beyond coincidence. But I just had to say, Bobby, you have really rigged things up pretty fast here. It's incredible how fast he had put all these things together, even for the avatar. So I got myself together, went out to where I had to check in, and they looked at my ticket, and she looks at the manifest and said, Mr. Stevens, I don't see you on our list of accepted passengers. And I said, look, go around and look at your telex. I'm sure it's just come in from the downtown office. She looked a little bit dubious at me, but I had said this so imperiously, I put on all of my best nerve and assurance, and so she was not going to gainsay me. She went around, come back with a piece of paper in her hands. Yes, we just received the authorization from the downtown office. So this is the official acceptance. You can go aboard now. I went aboard with my seat number. I was absolutely dead, dog tired, completely worn out with all of this. I sit down, attach my seat belt, and I drifted off to sleep right away. Next thing I knew, I opened my eyes, and the plane was absolutely quiet. Now I asked her, have you ever been on an Air India plane when it was absolutely quiet? Well, this was a total miracle that put all the others, really into shame. But there was not a sound. No children running up and down aisles, no squalling children, nothing of the sort. Just absolute calm. And outside there were these fluffy clouds just down underneath us. And it was beautiful, it was quiet, and the plane was just gliding along so peacefully. And then, just then, the loudspeaker system came on. And the person on it said, as you can see, we're flying just over a low overcast, and because of the enormous amount of traffic in and out of London, the crew, always in such conditions, has to be extremely cautious during takeoff. For that reason, I'm a little bit late today in getting you the particulars of the trip. This is your captain, Captain Iraq. Well, just to quickly fill you in on these two Iranis, many of you know Vilu in India, and that her daughter is all connected up over the Air India system. She was visiting when I got there, and so I said, the daughter, I said, I'm a bit curious. How many Iranis are there in the office staff system? He said, well, Don, I know that particularly well. You got the only Miss Irani of all Air India in the office section yesterday morning. And I said, well, what about, in the planes equipment? And she said, well, there's only one Captain Irani. You got him the same day. So, you know, this I expected by that time, you know, but it did tickle me. It tickled me considerably. So, but at any rate, let's leave Belu's daughter out of it. So here we are, into over the mountains and eating and falling asleep, and eating and falling asleep. And all of a sudden I wake up and I realize that we're down somewhere, and it has to be Delhi. Cabin is empty, and they're refueling and taking off. You know, the passenger was supposed to stay in there at that time. So I guess they took one look at it and decided this guy looks as if he's going to collapse anyway. So it's better let's let Bombay worry about him rather than try to worry about him here. So they left me. And so I looked around, and here's one of these sort of, and in those days, Air India did things in a slightly primitive fashion. There was a guy coming along with one of these little whisk boot sort of things, you know, they sweep floors. Well, it's absolutely classic. This is before Air India invented the vacuum cleaner. So here he is, he's sweeping these little tidbits there and that cigarette butt there and so on. And this way, the aisle gets clean, and he suddenly gets close to me, and he takes a look at me, and he's surprised to see a passenger still sitting there. And then he recovers from the surprise, and just in front of him, he picks up a brown newspaper, and he looks at it, and he tosses it over to me with an expectant smile. I look at it. It's the morning edition, the New Delhi edition of the Times of India. How did that get aboard the flight? There are no passengers aboard yet. The crew hasn't come aboard yet. How did that suddenly mysteriously materialize in the middle of the aisle? Anyway, I've never solved this mystery. I don't believe in materialization, by the way. You know, at least I didn't materialize that, unless Margaret did it some way. So here we are with a mystery, and I'm not interested in the Times of India. I'm not interested in anything, but some way I opened up mechanically, and there, in the middle of the first page, right in the middle, little notice: great Indian spiritual leader dies. And underneath that, just one or two simple sentences: Sarosh Irani, principal disciple of the great Indian mystic Meherwan S. Irani, known as Meher Baba, has announced that the internment, the burial services for Meher Baba are being postponed 24 hours to Monday to allow his close disciples, close followers in India, time to arrive. So I knew I was symbolic. I knew that I wouldn't arrive too late. So that was wonderful. Again, just exactly what was needed at the right time. So I felt, again, every little wish, every little uncertainty cared for, plumped into place. So eventually, passengers get on, you know, and I'm feeling all well and good about this. Really happy that it's going to work out right. Go off to Bombay, get in, what? I think it would have been about, by that time, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. It was still very early. And when I got in, the whole damned airport was alerted for Mr. Stevens and expediting Mr. Stevens. You know how long it takes to get through customs and baggage and things like that in Bombay? Well, I was catapulted through that blessed thing by well-meaning people who practically put wheels on me. Miss Irani had alerted the whole airport to this emergency to get Stevens through, and as quickly as possible over to the Indian Airlines desk to see if I could get on the flight to Pune. Well, I got over there when it was just announced and the 2 lines were forming, and although I didn't have a definite reservation, they had even alerted them that maybe Mr. Stevens would get there on an emergency basis and please accommodate him. Isn't that wonderful? Wasn't it? Oh, golly. You know, the manner in which our beloved takes care of us is absolutely incredible.
What point did Delia join?
Much later. It was on, I think, the 6th or maybe even the 7th day that she got it. Well, to go on. Here we are. At that particular time, all the tickets were written out by hand. Computer printouts were unknown. And of course, all of the handwriting was totally illegible. So when you get up to the front desk, there were 2 lines and 2 front desks and 2 scales. So each passenger arriving had to give his name out loud so they could compare that with the manifest for the plane. They couldn't get this from your ticket, you see. So you would always hear the different Indian names as you were going up. I can see 2 or 3 of you got the next punchline already. But at any rate, here I am. I'm the next person in line, and the fellow in the line just next to me, just before me, has to announce his name. I'm Mr. Irani. So I went with Mr. Irani next to me onto the flight. When we went up, this little thing, you know, it sort of wavers, and it was one of the old Viscounts. And they managed gradually to get through these different wind currents up to the gaps and up onto the plateau and finally into Pune Airport. And in Pune Airport, I said, I've got to have a taxi. Get the taxi, I take my bags, I go directly over to Meherabad. I go across the tracks up the hill, and there they have erected a bunting around Baba's tomb so that people arriving won't get sunburned and too hot. Nobody there. Absolute quiet. It's about, what, 2:30 in the afternoon, I think. I was a little surprised. I didn't see anybody at all. So I sit down and just wait for something to happen. I didn't dare go into Baba's tomb by myself. And then I don't know why. I'm not that shy, but I knew I mustn't. So I sat, and 2 minutes later, I see an old familiar figure coming around the water tank part there, you know, and out the gate. Here's Erich. Erich looks at me. I look at Erich and say, Don, how did you get here? I said, well, a series of miracles, but I'm here. I came from London this morning. He said, well, nobody else has arrived. Practically nobody, even from India, has managed to get here yet. So he said, you did pretty well. So I said, I want to see him, Erich. And he said, yes, let's go. We walk over to the tomb. I don't know if you ever saw it in the days before it was finished over. Erich walks down the stone steps inside. Baba is lying on cakes of ice underneath his body. You don't see the cakes of ice, though, because over it all, Mehera has spread a lovely spread, and then there are flowers, and then there's a little bit of wrapping around his head. Erich puts his feet on either side, standing on the ice, and inches his way up to standing just over Baba's face. He gets out his clean white handkerchief and does what I've seen him do so many, many, many times. With that loving, loving, tender gesture, he wiped Baba's brow just a little bit, hits the cloth a little bit around his throat again. Baba looked as if he had just fallen asleep 5 minutes before. He was so beautiful, pink-cheeked, calm, peaceful, absolutely superb. He did it. And then, Erich looked around at me, came back, he said, well, let's go. We left Baba there. You know, for some reason or another, it wasn't right just to sit and stare, but just to present one's greetings, which we did. And we went back, and when we went back, they said, well, I suppose probably some other people again, soon maybe you know someone. If you'd like to sit here and wait, I've got some other things to do. He went off. I leaned up against one of these poles that held the bunting up and started dropping off to sleep again. And all of a sudden, I thought there's somebody looking at me. So I open my eyes and look up. There's a tall man, white-haired, with a white dhoti, a white jacket, a bit of a turban, and sort of scraggly white beard. He said, you're Don Stevens, aren't you? Perfect English. And I said, yes, I'm Don Stevens. And he said, how'd you get here from San Francisco? I said, but I don't live in San Francisco anymore. I came from London. He said, oh, did you take yesterday afternoon's Air India flight? I said, yes, that's what I was on. And he said, my son, Captain Irani. So, you know, after all of this, I just had to say, Baba, even old Dense Stevens finally gets the story. I know you're here. And in fact, what I found I knew so deeply in my bones You know, it's a fun sort of a story. There are a lot of amusing things, also there was some very tense, tight things. But for all of my life, Bob established one thing very clearly, that for the avatar, the dropping of the body makes absolutely no difference in his relationship with you, his involvement in the deep things that are important in your life, and his deep internal relationship with you. So when I start talking, for instance, with somebody about relationship with Baba in daily life, I told you why this is not some sort of a funny little emotional story. This to me is an absolutely deep, deep essential reality. It's there. I thought many times afterwards, there was not the slightest bit of sadness in Erich when I saw him at that point. But then, well, let me go on just a tiny bit further and then we come back to Erich. I was absolutely stunned to find that I had no tears and no sense of sadness when I saw Baba also. To me, I just knew he was there. And it taught me so deeply for decades by that time that dropping the body was a totally insignificant gesture. Why could I be sad about it? But so I was really astonished by that. I don't think of the close mandali that I saw around in the early part that there was one of them who looked broken up in a certain sadness, but no tears, no deep sense of, agonizing bereavement at all. I think everyone had the sense that the avatar is here, he stays here. He's an eternal part of creation. But then, now that I've said that, I think maybe rather beautifully this atmosphere. Then what happens? Almost the last day before finally the seventh day, they covered his body. You've seen certainly the film that was done of that. And I'm off around by the far side of the tank somewhere. And all of a sudden, quite unexpectedly, nobody else around, I find Erich. Erich is sobbing. And I was shocked. I said, Erich, how can you, of all people, be sad when you know much better even than I that Baba has dropped his overcoat? And he said, yes, Tom, but you do not realize that also it is the personality as well of the avatar that we love. And we will never again see this particular personality of the Christ avatar. And then I understood why he was broken up. And that touched me very deeply. Well, Billy, we did what I was afraid might happen. I think we used up all of the time, but tomorrow night, I think what we really should do is exchange thoughts, ideas. Okay, all right, for me, there's an absolute reality that I know I'm not the only one who has this sense of the continued presence of the avatar and this participation in our lives. But I think then we start to have to come down to earth and say, well, how does he participate in our lives? What parts does he participate in? And above all, when I'm in some sort of an agonizing decision-making process, how can I find out this all-important thing, Baba's will? Because I see an awful lot of people who go through the tortures of the damned. There's another thing, too, that I would like tremendously to raise, and we toss our ideas back and forth. I wondered how many times in the last 2 years I've heard from totally different people in totally different areas a phrase which is almost identical each place, and that is, I got really angry with Baba for what he's been putting me through. Terribly, terribly good, sincere, deeply loving Baba lovers. Every once in a while, they say that. Why do they say it? And what are the correct parts and what are the incorrect parts? What's the basis of that? Some of the people who have said this are amongst the people that I admire and love most in the world. And if they say it, my God, they've got to have some very good reason for saying it. It's sincerely said. But I think it's one of the things that we need to examine. So I would suggest tomorrow night, if any of you are around, and we carry this on into practical daily life and how we live the reality of the avatar when we can't see it. Okay, Dylan?
Very nice. Thank
Way
you.
to go.
MeherBabaLibrary.